Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and this week's contract tip has to do with counteroffers and exhibits. So there seems to be a lot of misinformation that has been circulating lately, and just want to clarify what to do with exhibits when the parties are negotiating using counteroffers. So obviously, a buyer is going to initiate an offer on a full purchase and sale agreement, and the buyer is going to be the only one that signs that initial offer. So then the buyer sends that offer to the seller. And so then if the seller signs it, obviously the seller is going to sign the offer and the exhibits. Now, when the buyer initiates the offer, the buyer is going to sign the offer and initial all the exhibits. If the seller, upon receipt of the initial offer, is going to make a counter offer, then what the seller does is the seller prepares the items that they are going to counter on a counter offer form. And so initially, it is the counter offer form that will go back to the buyer, and that counter offer form is only going to have the seller's signature on it. Then if the buyer is going to make another counter offer, a counter to the counter offer, then the buyer is going to initiate a new counter offer form, send it to the seller, and that form is only going to have the buyer's signature on it. At some point throughout these negotiations using these counteroffer forms, there will be one counteroffer form that is going to be the only form. So there's only going to be one form, one final counteroffer form that is going to be the only document that contains both the buyer and the seller signatures. And the binding agreement then would be the terms of the original offer, and including all special stipulations and exhibits, and the only counteroffer form that is signed by both the buyer and the seller that has any changes to the original offer. So first of all, any of the successive intermediary counteroffers between the buyer and the seller, those are not part of the final agreement. So if there is a term that is addressed in one of the in-between counteroffer forms that is different from the original offer, that item needs to be carried through in the successive counteroffers. But back to the original issue of exhibits. So let's just make a simple example. Let's say the buyer submits an offer to the seller with exhibits, and the seller makes a counteroffer on a counteroffer form. The buyer is going to accept it. So the potential controversy that I hear, and not quite sure why this is an issue, but it seems to be an issue, is does the seller go back and sign the exhibits? And the answer is no, because the counteroffer form in and of itself specifically incorporates everything from the original offer, which includes the exhibits and the special stipulations. So let me read to you what it says. On the GAR counteroffer form, which is form F22, it specifically states that this is a counteroffer or a modification of the unaccepted original offer set forth in the purchase and sale agreement dated such and such, including all exhibits attached hereto or incorporated herein by reference from the original offer. Then that's just even in the first line of the counteroffer form. Then in paragraph C, it specifically states, again, I'm on the GAR, the GAR counteroffer form, it specifically states effect of accepting this counteroffer. When this counteroffer is signed by the buyer and the seller, a copy of the same is delivered to both parties, a legally binding agreement shall be formed. Since the original offer, including all exhibits thereto, is incorporated by reference into this counteroffer, only this counteroffer needs to be signed to create a legally binding agreement between the parties. So, and in the RE forms counteroffer, which is RE form 110 counteroffer, It also specifically states that the original offer executed by the party making said offer, which would be the buyer, for example, or seller if it's a counteroffer. Let me read it again. The original offer executed by the party making said offer, as amended only by this final counteroffer executed by all parties, shall constitute the full and entire agreement. Other counteroffers are not part of the contract. So the issue is, why doesn't the seller go back and sign the exhibits? Well, number one, they're incorporated by reference as part of the original offer. I mean, you don't rewrite the whole contract. Why on earth would a seller go back and sign an exhibit when you don't rewrite all the special stipulations that are agreed upon? You don't rewrite the terms that are accepted and agreed upon. If the terms of one of the exhibits is agreed upon, they're already incorporated. You don't need to initial them because they are referenced in the original offer, just like all the other terms that are accepted from the original offer. The counteroffer says whatever party is initiating the counteroffer, and you go binding on it, says all the terms of the original offer, including exhibits and special stipulations, are accepted except for what's changed on this counteroffer form or modified. So you don't need to sign the exhibits. Just like you absolutely do not go back. The seller never goes back and signs the original offer. The counteroffer references the original offer. The original offer in no way, shape, or form references the counteroffer. So then what do? Let's say we have a lender that wants one of the loan exhibits initialed. Well, if that's the situation, then what you should do is you're binding on the counteroffer form, which again incorporates the original offer. If the lender is insistent upon getting the seller's initials on that exhibit, what you can do is create a conformed copy. And even the GAR counteroffer form addresses this issue. And in paragraph D, it says clean copy of agreement. At any time prior to closing, either party, if so requested by the other, shall sign a conformed or clean copy of the agreement, combining the terms of the original offer with the controlling and supplemental provisions of the counteroffer into one document. So if you have a lender that is specifically requesting initials on an exhibit, then my suggestion would be execute a conformed copy or clean copy, and then you can have the exhibits and have both parties sign the clean copy offer purchase and sale agreement with the exhibits. Now you have to be really careful also in general, because sometimes there could be a term of one of the exhibits that is addressed in the counteroffer. So for example, let's say that the buyer is making an offer and they are getting financing subject to FHA insurance. So they're using the FHA loan contingency exhibit. So as you know, on that exhibit under the amendatory clause paragraph where it talks about the appraisal, it has a fill in the blank with a $sign for you to fill in how much money that the property must appraise for. So and since it has a $sign, you need to fill that in with numerals, not write the words sale price. So let's say the buyer's original offer, let's say it's $200,000. And so on that FHA loan exhibit, it says $200,000. Then the seller sends the buyer a counteroffer, and they counter the sale price to, let's just say, $250,000. And let's say that goes back to the buyer. Let's say the buyer signs it, and the only thing in the seller's counteroffer was the sale price of $250,000. So if that loan contingency exhibit was not addressed in the counteroffer and the buyer signs it, here's what you now have. You now have a binding agreement between the buyer and the seller, buyer getting an FHA insured loan, and you have a sale price of $250,000. But in essence, the appraisal contingency for that FHA loan is $200,000 because that is what was included on that FHA loan exhibit. So number one, So let's say the appraisal comes in at $200,000. Well, now the buyer is in a bind because the buyer now is obligated to go through with the purchase at $250,000 sale price, met the appraisal contingency, because the appraisal contingency in that amendatory clause was only for $200,000 and the property appraised for that. Buyer's going to have to come up with $50,000 in order to consummate the contract. Cannot terminate under the appraisal contingency because that appraisal contingency, the parties went binding with those two different amounts, one for sale price and one for appraisal contingency. So given that same example, no way would a seller go back and sign that original exhibit if that's what the parties went binding under. If they went binding under a sale price of one price and the FHA loan exhibit a different price, the seller's not going to go back and sign that exhibit, and there's no need to. So anyway, hope this contract tip helps you a little bit. Again, it is specifically spelled out in those exhibits. We do have a lot of parties that if there was not a change in the exhibits in a counteroffer, if everything from that exhibit was accepted by both parties and is part of the binding contract, we do have some parties that choose to have the seller does agree to go back and sign those initial exhibits. But again, that is absolutely not necessary. It's not required because those exhibits are incorporated just like everything else. For example, you don't rewrite all the special stipulations and you don't go back, and the seller absolutely never goes back and signs the original offer. So anyway, hope this contract tip did help to clarify that issue. And thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.